Tov to you both. Right, so we are up to, okay, so we're in the middle of the, so we're right at the bottom of Vav Amud Aleph, and if you remember the key point we were discussing really about this whole Gemara is this idea of Chazaka. We went through that long Rashi, which we said isn't really Rashi, it's an addition to Rashi, but it seems to be maybe perhaps the Rashbam. It talks about the notion of, we know that there's a whole perek in Basra about Chazaka. Chazaka is 3 years, and basically that means, what does Chazaka mean? Chazaka means that you're in it. You've got a claim to someone. It has to be a taina, a claim. You sold it to me, you gave it to me as a gift, and you've been there for 3 years. So then you have this. It would say it's not quite squatters' rights, because we clarified that last time. It's very important to understand that it's not a form of acquisition; it's a proof. There's a difference, right? It's a proof. It's a proof that you own it, right? That's what it is. It's a raya, yeah. So here, what we're going to do is we'll learn this Gemara first according to that pshat, which is that the same thing here. It's the same idea. You use someone else's property in a certain way, right? For example, you have a gutter that's dripping into your neighbor's garden or whatever, right? And you've been doing that, and you're doing that, and he hasn't objected, so it's yours, right? That's what we say. We say effectively that it is that it's your right. However, what the Rashbam, as we'll take it to the Rashbam, says that the big difference is this chazaka works immediately, right? It's such a strong and powerful thing. The guy next door neighbor is exercising, your next neighbor exercising this right over you, then you should have objected immediately. And if you don't, then it's yours immediately. Your right is there immediately. Then that's called a chazaka. As we'll see, it might not be immediately, it might be some things are a bit longer than that, but the key point is that it's not 3 years. That's what we're saying, okay? So we spoke last week, as I said, about placing beams, we've had drips of water. Now we have there's a little small Gemara in between, which is related, but slightly, but not exactly the same. But it talks about it's a continuation in terms of the rights that you have over someone's property, and then we come back to this discussion about this chazaka idea. So bottom of the Omid, someone who rents out a house to his friend, in a large, like a large palace, a large building. So basically, the scenario is that you've got a building which has a lot of rooms divided up. It could be a major apartment complex or whatever, and you rent out a room inside it to someone else. So the Gemara says, mishtamish or harezeh mishtamish b'kosleh u'b'zizeh ad arba amos. He's allowed to. It's just mishtamish. He's allowed to use the walls and any zizim. Zizim are like little protrudent things that stick out of the wall, which you could use to hang things on, like hanging baskets or whatever. You can use them on the outside of that of where your room is, effectively ad arba amos, up to 4 amos. So let's see the first Rashi. Biro Gedola, Bais Aruch Ma'od, top of the Omid. The Bais, a long house or whatever, Cholak Mitochel Harbi Chadorim, and it's divided inside it to many different number of different Chadorim, different rooms, Chadorim, small rooms. The Hiskir, Ozeh Echad Mihen, and he rented out to this one of them. He can use the walls. He rented out one of them. He's allowed to use in the walls on the outside, any sort of cavities in the walls. Alpnei orchon, its length, the length opposite his property on the outside of bachutz, ad arba amos, up till 4 amos. Af shaloi keneged beisa, even not opposite his own house. Ubezizim ayotzim miksolim, right? Ubezizim ayotzim miksolim, and also same thing with the zizim, these little protrudences which go out of the walls. So the chiddush here is that you would expect that if you rent a house, you rent a room or whatever it is, or as I said, like an apartment inside a large building, you'd probably expect that you're only entitled to use the wall space that's directly outside your property, right? But instead we say there's a bit of latitude here, and you get up to 4 amos, even not corresponding to your particular property.
Does this depend on whether or not there's someone in the next room or not?
So that's the thing. The Gemara doesn't really seem to clarify whether or not there's a difference as to whether someone else is there or not. Maybe they have the right. Maybe they have the right to do so as well. Maybe it's like a mutual right, so they can do so in your property. You know, they can do. You know, that there's this shared space almost. There's this understanding that you have the right to use beyond the space immediately outside your property. You got like 4 amos on either. You know, you got a sort of a bit of latitude on the outside. I think the only way to understand this Gemara is really, in a sense, the next few words kind of clarify it. It says, "Ba'ove hakosel." On the thickness of the wall, but mokom shenagu, in a place where the minhag is to do so. It's not entirely clear whether those words mokom shenagu actually go back on the first line or not. Meaning, I think the only way to understand this must be because if it's mokom shenagu, if it's a place where the minhag is to do so, the minhag is to use the space beyond, then that's where you should be able to use, right? That's what makes sense. That's what makes sense to me anyway, at least, right? That it would seem to be, where the minhag is to use the wall in that way. Then you follow the minhag. We've seen already many times that the minhag is a very strong feature here, very, very strong feature. If the custom is to do so. So the thickness of the wall, the top of the wall, for example, Rashi says, so you rent it out to him an upper story. Yeah, inside this large property. So the halacha is you can use the thickness of the wall on top, right? Yeah. Avul b'tarbitz apadni loy. But in a tarbitz apadni, you can't do so. So what is a tarbitz apadni? Derech b'nei biro chashuv, Rashi says, when they build important buildings. What they used to do was so they used to leave in front of the main entrance like a nice garden, for a pleasure garden almost, for going for walks, for air, or whatever. And they used to, be able to grow in it vegetation, or whatever. It looked very nice for the visually. And there's no permission for this guy to hang from the walls at all, because he can't enter inside. Yeah. He's got no permission to enter at all. It seems to be that people just used it visually, they just enjoyed it. And because of that, he's not allowed to hang anything on the walls that correspond to that place. Nachman himself says, he says, even in a tarbitz apadni, you're allowed to hang stuff on your walls facing that area. Even though people don't go inside. But there was a space. Rashi says, Kol hekav shachari abatim kori rechova. Any enclosed space behind the houses is called rechova. It literally means like an open space. And that in front of the house is called a chotzer, a courtyard. So Rashi then adds, there's an assumption that space is not hired out to him to use. But Rava goes even further, says, even a space behind the houses, that is also, you're allowed to use that. You're allowed to use that as well in order to, once you rent a room or an apartment, you're allowed to use the space, even the space that is behind the house. Yeah, behind the house. It seems to be.
Can I just clarify?
Yeah.
Sorry, just to understand. So you rent out a room in your house, and what the Gemara is saying is that the guy can basically, well, if there are beams in the wall, he can sort of extend his room by 4 amos outwards. Is that right?
It's saying you have a bit of latitude. It's not. I suppose a room in your house is not that accurate. It seems to be more describing I suppose an apartment. Okay, Rashi does use the word chadorim ketanim, small rooms, right? It seems more like an apartment. So we're dealing here with what would be the normally expected practice. And we're saying that normally expected practice is that you have a little bit of latitude in terms of what you put outside your room. You can make your area. Let's say each let's say for your argument's sake, each apartment has its own entrance, right? So can you can you stick your door sign, right? Just on the wall slightly next to your apartment, directly opposite where your apartment is. To our minds, it does sound a bit strange because we would assume that you only have your own wall, right? Your own wall. But it seems to be that the minhag was more flexible in terms of the usage of the space on the outside. And that's why, that's all considered to be part of your property. It is possible that there's no other property. It'll make more sense actually if we say that. There's no one else there. Rashi says that you can use these holes al panei orcha mibachutz. So on the length, on the outside, up to 4 amos, right? And he says that word al panei orcha and its length. I'm not sure whether that means above the property, or to the right or the left. It's not entirely clear. If it was, either way, it would seem simpler to understand this Gemara that there's no one else in that space, and therefore that's assumed to be hired out to you as well. But if you look at Rabbeinu Gershom with this business about Tarbet Zapadni, it's very, very small print on the outermost column on the Gemara. Yeah, can you see this? He says. It's a bit hard to give an identifying reference. It's about 15 lines down. He says, Aval b'tarbet zapadni. Can you see? It's like really, really tiny print on the side, yeah? He says, a tarbet zapadni. Have you got that? Yeah, can you see it, right? He says like this. He says, Ginas bison. It's like this pleasure garden, shesomach lepaltin, which is close to the paltin, which is the name of the main palace or area. You see the similarity in the words. Eina mishtamish lebatim, ela lepaltin. It's not for the individual rooms, it's for the paltin. I think what he means, it's for the whole building. And then look, he carries on. He says, and then the Gemara says, the first opinion one says, but the space behind the buildings, you definitely can't use. That means even the one who says that Rav Nachman says you can use the Tarbet HaPani, says not the Rechava, because the Rechava, the space behind is definitely for the whole building and not for you personally. Yeah. And then the third view is no, even that, there's a personal right over that through your hiring the individual property. So you see, that's what the debate is. Are you with me? Is the associated, what's the right word? Accoutrements. I don't know. Whatever the other stuff, right? The other area, the space, the outside, the front garden, back garden. Are they for the individual usage of the people, or do they belong to the what they call in Israel the vad bayit, right? They're not your personal right. They belong to the owners of the building itself. Maybe vad bayit, Shlomo will correct. Maybe vad bayit is not really a good. A good comparison, because the vad bayit, of course, is really everyone.
Yeah,
it's everyone together. No, it hasn't got a separate ownership, right?
No, it's everybody together. Yes,
it's everyone together. So that's not such a good example. Here, it's more that it's owned by the. But either way, it's a central ownership. That's the idea. Okay, right. So as I said to you, this little piece of Gemara really stands by itself. It's related in the sense it's got the same idea, the rights that you have, when you rent, when you're owning something. But the next Gemara directly relates back to this idea of chazaka, and it's here where we'll see the big machlokes between the Rosh and Rashi, or the Rashbam. Omar Ravina says, "Hi kashura de metalalosa, kashura de metalalosa, which is like a roof beam." Up to 30 days is not a chazaka. It's not a chazaka. But bosa tlosin yomin, after 30 days, havi chazaka. It's a chazaka. So let's go directly to Rashi. Lo have chazaka, says Rashi. Im samcha al kosel chaveroi. If he places it, he rests it on the wall of his friend's wall. V'lo micha b'soch shloshim yom, and he doesn't object within 30 days. Lo havya chazaka, it's not a chazaka, litoin, to argue, to claim, velomar, to say, payasticha b'moes ad olam. I've appeased you with money up till, forever. So the scenario is very simple. You have a wall that belongs clearly to someone else. The wall definitely belongs to the other guy. The next door neighbor uses it to rest his roof beams on. For whatever reason, he wants to use it to build, some canopy he's creating, or the roof of his roof beams of his house. The actual roof beams of his house are resting on the other guy's wall. He says, the Gemara says, within 30, and he doesn't object. The guy said the guy owns the wall, doesn't say anything. So within 30 days, lo have a chazaka. It's no chazaka return to claim v'lomar and say he's not allowed to say, if it's still within 30 years, he can't say, I paid you for this right forever. Because we say when it's within 30 days, people are not particular. They're not bothered. Up to 30 days, people are not bothered. He doesn't object. Sovri thinks, my friend, this guy, he requires shade. And a few days later, he'll take it away. He thinks, you know what? He's got a temporary structure, big deal. He's left it up for a couple of weeks. I'm not bothered, okay? But once it gets to beyond 30 days, if it's there for 30 days, hovi chazaka. So Rashi's saying that what? It's a chazaka, like we said before, Rashi learns it's a chazaka forever, yeah? 30 days, because by then, you would have objected. The Gemara carries on, v'yisukkah de mitzvahi, if it's a sukkah, a mitzvah sukkah, in other words, a sukkah on sukkahs, ad shiva yomin lavi chazaka, up to 7 days is not a chazaka. Bossa shiva yomin havi chazaka. Once it's there for longer than 7 days, that's a chazaka. Says Rashi, the sukkah the mitzvah bossa zayin havi chazaka. The kimun de shavkua Allah yosem and atzorech havalei mechiyeh. Since he's left it there for longer than 7 days, he should have objected. Why should he have objected? So again, there's another little addition in Rashi here, Tosfos. And the fact that he didn't object, we can say he must have paid him money forever. In other words, the right to leave it there forever. Because this was the general practice. He used to fix the sukkah for the purposes of all forever, in other words, all the years. And therefore, miyad la'achar zayin havir chazaka. Miyad la'achar zayin havir chazaka. Immediately after 7 days, it's a chazaka. It's not similar to a sukkah which is just being used as a roof, like a roof beam that we mentioned in the previous line. Which is only a chazaka, right? It's only a chazaka in 30 days. What's the purpose of that? It's made for shade. Yeah, it's made for shade. But this sukkah, he made it for the purpose of all the days of Sukkot. Yeah, he made it for all the days of Sukkot every year. That's what he made it. That's what he made it for. Yeah, So in other words, once you leave it there for longer than one day longer than Sukkot, then people know that that your intention is to always leave it there. It seems to be that the idea is that a sukkah, yeah, you would never leave for longer than sukkahs, right? So once you leave it for even a day longer than sukkahs, that shows that you must be intending to leave it there forever. Now, Tosfos here points out the obvious question, which is we don't take a sukkah down, right, after the 7th day of Sukkot, yeah, because it's Yom Tov, it's a minor problem, right? So Tosfos says there was a one-line Tosfos here, the second Tosfos, top of the page, at Shiva Yomi says, Lav Dafka Shiva, not specifically 7, the B'Shmini Atzeres, obviously you can't take it down on the 8th day, on Shmini Atzeres, okay, on Shmini Atzeres. So therefore, it can't be, it's not specifically the Lav Dafka, the 7th day. Yeah.
If Sukkot is Thursday, Friday, then
then it's going to be longer. Yeah, then it's going to be longer. That's going to be longer. Yeah.
Is there a presumption in all these chazaka cases that the owner of the adjoining property has visual sight of what's been happening?
I think so. Yes, and I think the same rules. Again, if we learn like Rashi, we're going to follow the same pattern that the Gemora discusses extensively in Cheskes Abatim, which is what happens if the guy's overseas. So there's all these Gemaras there about, well, he couldn't object. He couldn't say anything because he wasn't here. The guy was on a long business trip for 3 years in Spain. So he never saw him, even if it's a 3-year chazaka. So the same rules will apply, yeah? Where you have to be able to say, midoloi micha, from the fact that he did not object, it shows that he was happy with the arrangement.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So he would have definitely been aware of it, right?
Yeah. But yeah. And then the Gemara says, v'chavri betino, if he attached it with cement, la'alta v'chazaka. It's chazaka immediately. It's a chazaka immediately. All right. Why? Because if whether it's a roof beam, I mean, I think this is really going, well, it can be either case, and really, it could be the sukkah, it could be the roof beam, it doesn't make a difference, right? If you have a roof beam resting on the wall of your friend's wall, and you get up there with a cement mixer, and you fix it on with cement, no one in their right mind, is going to suggest that you mean it temporarily. Yeah, it's obvious that you mean a permanent structure. You mean it to be there permanently, and therefore, if he doesn't object immediately, finished. Okay, that's it, right? It's his. Okay, so right. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want to see the rest of that Rosh now, because the Rosh learns differently, as we mentioned last time. So do you have a copy of the Rosh, or do you? No. Okay, so let me see if I can bring it up on the screen. Let me see if I can bring it up on the screen. What's the easiest way of doing this? It's probably actually to take a picture of it. Hold on a sec. Let me just get this. Apologies for not preparing this earlier. Let me just get a hold of this. Okay, 1 minute. Yeah, if you're following in the Rosh, let me just bring it up. Hold on a minute. So it's actually on the Rosh that we said is just after the Gemara. It's on the 3rd Omid, so it's a Kuf Ayin Tes. I'm going to try and bring it up here as well. You should be able to. One second. Okay, here we go. I can do it now. Okay, let me just do share screen. There we go. Okay, can you see that? Yeah, you see that? Yeah, that's just the Rosh at the back of the Gemara. I can make it a bit bigger. Okay, yeah, everyone see that? Okay, Omar of Nachmas, he brings the Gemara here. Let's leave that. First, he brings this Gemara that we saw earlier. No, sorry, let's go back a bit here. He brings the Achsik, the Shavki, the Achsik, the Notfi, one we saw yesterday about the water. The Hochanami Iri, again, the Rosh we said says, Iri b'cheska shalosh shonim. We're talking about chazaka of 3 years, v'chazaka sheishim otayna. The big difference between the Rosh and Rashi is the Rosh says here as well, it means for 3 years. He did it for 3 years, and only then is it a chazaka. Okay? Now, he then brings the Gemara here, Rav Nachman and Rabbi Baravu about maske bayas lachaveru, about the Turbet Padni, the Rechova Shachar Yabat, everything we've seen. Then he quotes the Gemara of Ravina, Amar Ravina HaKashura de Metalalosa, the roof beam. After 30 days is chazaka. Now, he says like this, where the star is. Loi b'chezkas kniya iri. We're not talking about a chazaka through acquiring something, right? When he talks about, because the big problem is, this is the problem according to the Rosh. The Rosh says, you want a chazaka to show that you've bought something, a proof that you've bought something. The Rosh says you always need 3 years. So what's he going to do with this Gemara? You with me? This Gemara says 30 days, clearly. And it says if you attach it with cement, it's immediate. Yeah? So you with me? You understand the question, right? What's he going to do with this Gemara, right? So he says, Loi b'cheskas kniya iri. This Gemara Ravina is not talking about a chazaka to prove that you've bought something. Ela amas nisin koi. It's going on our Mishnah. Me arba amas ulamalo. We said if it's above 4 amas, b'cheskas shelo, then there's an assumption that you haven't given the money. Ki ahid Omer Rav Nachman beikavi lo have a chazaka. Right? Beikavi lo have a chazaka. So you remember in the Mishnah we said in the Mishnah not Rav Nachman, that's in the Gemora, but the Mishnah talked about how do we know whether or not a person has paid for something? Yeah, he comes along and says, I'm telling you that I paid, right? So the Rosh says that's what's going on here. When Ravina says Hai Kashura de Metalalosa, a roof beam up to 30 days is not a chazaka, that means up to 30 days there is no assumption that you've paid for the right. But after 30 days, there's an assumption that you've paid for the right. Yeah? It's nothing to do with chazaka of saying you coming along and saying you sold it to me and you didn't object. Nothing to do with that. It is about the question, when the question arises as to whether or not you paid for the right. Yeah? And that's why he relates it to this idea of Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman said earlier about Beikavi, about windows. Where was that? So that was about where, let me just find, where was the windows? He said that, so where was that? Yeah, that's right. We brought that in the previous Omid as well. The Rav Nachman said that Beikavi windows are no proof that he's paid. Do you remember that we had this case where if the guy, not windows, really put little apertures in for the roof beams to rest in, and he wanted to argue, you would never have agreed to that if not for the fact, that I paid you. You would never have done that if not for the fact that I paid you. That's what he tried to argue, right? There was these he put little holes in his wall, right, to rest roof beams in. So he says to him, I must have paid you, never have done that. And the guy answers back, no, you know why I did it? Because otherwise my wall would fall apart. Yeah, that's why I did it. I didn't want you to later stage start drilling holes in my wall. So he says it's exactly the same thing. Is that? So he says here we're talking about the same thing. It's just that in between we brought all these statements of Rav Nachman. But this statement of Ravina is going on our Mishnah when there's a dispute as to whether or not he paid. Up to 30 days, the burden of proof is on him to prove that he paid. After 30 days, you assume that he's paid because that's the logical thing that would have happened. When it comes to chazaka of buying things, when you want to prove that you bought something, even if you attach it with cement, you got to have 3 years. Okay.
Question?
Yeah, Martin.
So I based on what we learned last week at the beginning of this sugya, I made the assumption that paying and planning permission were kind of the same thing. And when we started learning this sugya, I kind of thought that actually planning or permission to do what you're doing as opposed to paying for what you're doing are two different things. But the Rosh is saying that actually you don't need permission, you just have to pay.
I think we are saying that they are, well, it depends what you mean by planning.
I meant he's got the rights to do what he's doing. So for example, when we talk about he's putting a beam on top of his wall, well then it's irrelevant whether he's paid him. Does he have the right to do it? And can I reject it within 30 days or after 30 days?
So according to Rashi, the question is, does he own the right? It's about ownership rights, what you might call planning, planning rights or whatever. Have I got the rights to do this or not? According to the Rosh, it's not about that at all. He's saying that the cases where there's no dispute about the right or not to have or rights or no rights, everyone agrees. The case is where we agree that you've got the rights, right? I gave you the rights. There's no dispute over that according to the Rosh. The only dispute is, did you pay? Did you pay me what you were supposed to pay for that right? In other words, it's the same as the Mishnah. The Mishnah says you have a wall in the courtyard that falls down. He's obligated to rebuild it. Up to 4 amas b'cheskas shenosan. There's a chazaka that he's paid the money. What does it mean there, chazaka? It's an assumption. Nothing to do It's nothing to do with cheskas gimel shonim, which is a proof that you own it. No, it's another different type of chazaka. That's why it's so confusing, because there are three types of chazaka we mentioned last time. There are three totally separate types of chazaka. You can have chazaka, which is an assumption that something happens in a certain way. You can have a chazaka, which is, I've been here for 3 years, the squatter's rights chazaka, and therefore that's proof that I own it, which is how Rashi learns the sugya. And then there's the other totally different one, which is like a different type of, a way of taking ownership in a field, like digging in a field or something like that, totally separate, whatever, right? So what the Rosh is saying, there's a lot of logic to it if you think about it, because this Gemora is out of place according to Rashi. Are you with me? It shouldn't be here. It should be in the third parak. We're not talking about that here. We're talking here, our Mishnah is talking about where there's no dispute over ownership. The Mishnah was talking about whether or not people pay up. Do you assume they pay or don't pay in a situation where the rules and regulations between neighbors are not entirely clear, which is basically what we've been talking about the whole way since Daf Base, right? Shutvin who have this dispute and they build a wall, who's responsible to pay and everything else. So that's how the Rosh learns this Gemara. That's how the Rosh learns this Gemara. So, yeah, you with me? Does everyone follow that, right? So,
Yeah.
Okay. So this is. Let me just stop this a second. So if you go back to the Gemara now,
And according to Rashi, it's cheskat shimush. The sugya is about cheskat shimush. Exactly the continuation of the previous Gemara that we learned last week.
Exactly.
This
According
why
to Rashi,
it is in the right place because it's about usage.
according to Rashi, this Gemara is talking about proof of ownership. Yeah, up to 30 days.
If I use something, because I'm using it, and you don't stop me, yeah,
I have the.
it means that I'm the owner.
I am the owner of that right,
Yeah.
the right to place my beams on your roof, on your wall, whatever that. I own that right, yeah. According to the Rosh, the Rosh can't learn like
It's
that.
mine, but the question if you paid or not. Yeah.
Exactly. According to the Rosh can't learn like that because the Rosh holds for those rights you always need 3 years, and the Gemara says 30 days. So the Rosh says it must be the same as our Mishnah, which is a dispute as to whether you pay or not. And then you go with chazaka assumptions, that type of chazaka. Do we assume you pay or not? The question is, if it's within 30 days, we assume you haven't paid. If it's after 30 days, we assume you have paid. Yeah. And if you've cemented it down, then we definitely assume you've paid. And this is how it goes. And if you look at the first Tosfos, you'll see that Tosfos, the Maram says this. You see that Tosfos also holds like the Rosh. The High Kashura de Metalalos. Look at the very first Tosfos. Omer Rabbeinu Tam says. You see me top of the page, top of the Omid, the Amasnisin Koi. It's going on the Mishnah. The Ad Shloshim Yom Lo Avi Chazaka. Up to 30 days, there's no assumption that you've paid. V'hovi b'chezkas shelo nosan. There's an assumption that you have not paid. Mikan ve'elech hovi b'chezkas shenosan. And then onwards, there's an assumption that you have paid. V'osi shaper, and therefore it makes sense, says Rabbeinu Tzam, to nokti hocha v'le b'chezkas abatim. That's what it's doing here, and not in Chezkas Abatim, because it belongs with our Mishnah. Now jump the next little Tosfos and go to the one after that, another tiny Tosfos. We did the one about Sukkos. V'chavri betino la'alta v'chazaka, says Tosfos. V'omer Rabbeinu Shmuel, says Rabbeinu Shmuel. He's going on the bit about cement. The chazakos dela'el, the chazakos earlier on, love the shalosh shonim. You're not talking about 3 years. Elala alta is an immediate chazaka, kedamin and hacha, as we learn here. So what does Rabbeinu Shmuel hold like? If he points out that these chazakas are not 3-year chazakas, but they're immediate chazakas, who does he hold like?
Rashi.
He holds like Rashi. You with me? Yeah, he holds like Rashi. Rabbeinu Tam holds like the Rosh, and that we're talking about the type of chazaka as in an assumption whether you paid for it or not. And Rabbeinu Shmuel holds like Rashi, that we're talking here about proof of ownership, and therefore he points out that this happens immediately, like we saw on the previous page, right? Previous Omer, that you can have chazakas of proof of ownership, which can happen immediately. Yeah, like.
But according to the Rosh, even if I put cement, it's not enough. You need to wait 3 years for ownership.
For ownership, exactly. According to Rosh, it makes absolutely no difference. You want to prove that you own something, right?
Yeah.
Prove that you own it, you need 3 years.
3 years
Okay?
plus Tana. Yeah.
Plus Taina, of course, plus a claim, like you bought, you sold, and whatever.
Yeah.
And so just the final piece I want to show you is just how this plays out in the Shulchan Aruch. It's always very beautiful to see how it flies into the Shulchan Aruch. So I'm going to
We're
share
not
my
talking about ownership here.
Pardon?
We're not talking about ownership for if he's cementing his beams to the guy's wall. We're not saying that he owns the wall.
Yes. I know it's confusing. I shouldn't really use that word. What I mean is ownership of the right.
Of the usage of the wall.
Of
The
the
right
usage
to use,
right.
the right to use. Yeah.
Yeah, the right
mean
to
the right
use
to
it, not the ownership. It's not his wall.
100%, and you're correct. And it's it's clear if we just say usage rights. Absolutely. So let me just show you this. This in the I feel I can find. Oh, I've got. It should be somewhere. Here it is. Okay, here I've got the Shulchan Aruch open here in Bar Ilan. Can you see that? Yeah. Can everyone see this? Yeah. Okay, fine. So just to quickly show you what the Shulchan Aruch says, I'm going to move this out of the way, otherwise it's going to get move this thing out of the way. Okay, so let's go to our case. Where's our case? Chofar Shimon b'Kosel zeh. He says that Shimon digs into this wall, the Hechnes bo kara achas, and he puts a beam inside it. The Shosak Ruvain v'lo micha bo. So he digs a hole in Shimon's wall. That's his case. And Ruvain is silent, and he doesn't object. Hechazik b'mokom hakora. He's got a chazaka. He got a chazaka that he owns the chazaka to in the place where the beam is, because Ruvain didn't object. Afilo oysa katana. And even if it's small and Shimon wants to change it for a larger beam, he's allowed to do so. Remember, we saw that machlokas as well last time. Can you is a chazaka for a small beam or is a chazaka for a large beam? Hagos says the Ramah, now the Ramah says, with these chazakas of ladders, the case of a ladder was, I think, the Sulam case is about leaning a wall, leaning a ladder against his friend's wall or whatever. We don't have time to go into all this, but he says on Itzas Koros and this idea of sticking beams into people's walls. Yesh Omrim, some say the Bo'in and Chazaka Gimel Shonim v'Taina. Some say you need 3 years and a taina. Yeah, you need 3 years and a taina. So the Ramah brings this opinion here. He says Tur b'Shem Rabbeinu Tam. We saw Toras Rabbeinu Tam v'Oviv Harosh, and the Rosh was like that as well. The Yesh Cholkin v'Chol Chazakas Halalu, but some dispute all of these Chazakas. So he brings the 2 opinions in the Ramah. He says the Rashbam and the Gaonim and the Rambam, they all hold like that as well. So you see, as we saw, Rabbeinu Shmuel is the Rashbam, I think. So he says, no, that it can even be immediately. And also the same machlokas exists earlier on with the idea of making a ziz. The ziz is the little protrusions. He says, so let's say you own a house and there's a guy whose courtyard is below your house, okay? And you decide one day to put a protrusion, overhanging the other guy's courtyard. And he doesn't object. La'alta. La'alta hari hechzik ba'alaziz. Shulchan Aruch paskins, immediately, it's a chazaka. Immediately. You own the right, he hasn't objected. Or mishtamish bo says the Ramah, can use it, and he can stop the owner of the chotzer using it. The Yesh Omrim, same thing, same machlokas. The kol chazakas alalu bo'in and gimel shanim. Some say you need 3 years. And if he hasn't made makazik 3 years, he can still object. Has to come with a claim, like karka. Okay, so there you see how this machlokas in the Gemora goes through into Shulchan Aruch and the Ramah and the different opinions there. Okay, is that all clear?
So what's the final halacha then?
Oh, that's a different question. I don't know. No, I mean, what I say, that's a question in how the Acharonim will understand when the Ramah brings 2 yesh omrims. Do you understand? Sometimes it's clear. The Shulchan Aruch clearly paskins, you can see clearly, like Rashi. Yeah? He says that clearly, right? Shulchan Aruch paskins, if you produce this, you stick something into the Franz Chossi, it doesn't say anything, bang, it's yours, immediately, right? So the Shulchan Aruch is clear. The question is about the Ramah, because the Ramah says, some say and some say this. So it's a yesh for yesh. And in that, there's a big debate amongst the Achronim, I think, how you reconcile what the Ramah holds. I think there's discussions as to whether there's greater weight given to the first Yeshomim over the other one, So yeah, I'm sure that debate follows out here as well in the Ramah. But the Shulchan Aruch clearly passes like Rush. Okay. Yeah, Jeremy, I don't know if that answers your question, Jeremy, but it comes close. Okay. What was that?
He's right.
Yeah,
he's right.
No, but at least you see how But anyway, this is a big machlokas. You see, ramifications in many cases. Okay, let's carry on the Gemara. Omar Abaya says, "Shnei batim shnei tzili reshus harabim." You have two houses on two opposite sides of the street. This one makes a marker, a marker. We know from the Torah is a fence, right? A fence. L'chatzi gago for half his roof. And this one makes a marker, a fence for half of his roof. Either one is not facing the other, so they both, right? The one is doing one half of his roof, and the other one is doing the other half of his roof, not facing each other. Umadif, but they protrude a little bit over. They overlap a little bit. And what's the point of this? What is the point of this? The point is to prevent the other guy, seeing into your roof. They used to do all sorts of stuff on the roof, basically using it as another room of the house. If it's on two opposite sides of the street, there's the rule is that they should both participate. And the way they do that is one builds half on his side, one builds half on his side. My Rabbi Rabbi says, then, well, why are you telling me only a case where the street's in the middle? Even if there was a private domain in the middle, why it has to be a Rishus Harabim down the middle? Same thing would apply with the Rishus Hayachim. Says the Gemora, Rishus Harabim strichale. You need to tell me the case with a public street, a Rishus Harabim, because now the thing, what are you thinking? He can say to him, "So boys, let's turn to him ibnei Rishus Harabim." He can say to him, at the end of the day, you have to build this a fence anyway, because you don't want people in the street seeing onto your roof. Kamash malon. You can say, so in other words, each one can say to the other, you can't force me to build the roof, and because you needed to do it anyway. So it's not something why should I have a right? Again, the point here is that each person living in each side of the street, right, in each roof, has a right, is able to force the guy opposite to build and pay for half a fence, so that once the thing is built, neither of them can see into each other's house. Okay, but surely they can say to the other guy, you needed to build a fence anyway. So let's say one of them wants the fence and the other one doesn't. You can have that. One of them doesn't care. Says, I'm not bothered. Why can you force me to build a fence? And he's got a very good claim, because he can say to the guy opposite, you're trying to force me to pay for half the fence, to build half a fence on my property. I don't care, you care, and you had to build it anyway, because people will see him from the street. So that's why the Gemara has to tell us that he can say to him, Rabbim, the many people in the street, they can see me in the daytime. In the nighttime, they can't see me at the nighttime. But you, right? But you, whether in the daytime or whether at night, you can see me. Yeah. And because of that, that's why I can force you to build a fence.
The other thing is that you're talking about a roof as well, which is like maybe many stories up, which you can't really see from the street anyway. Whereas you're on the same level.
That's right. That's the next line of the Gemara, effectively. Inami, alternatively, Rabbim ki kamina chazuli. The people in the street, when I stand up, they can see me. When I sit down, they can't see me. That's basically what you're saying, Jeremy, right? Yeah. Because of the angle. You you can see me whether I stand up or I sit down. It makes no difference. So because of that, that's why we need to build that's why I can force you to build it. And then Gemara gives a third reason. The public, if they look closely, they can see me. If they don't look closely, they can't see me. But you, you're going to see me without even thinking. They're further away, so they have to like squint up to see me. You're definitely going to see me, and because of that, that is why, because of that, I can force you to build this to build the fence.
Isn't the obvious question? I mean, clearly houses are built on different levels. So if I can see into someone else's house, wouldn't that be the obvious question? So you must build a wall to stop me seeing into your house, whatever the situation. If I live on a hill, people at the top of the hill can see into my top. There must be a simpler way of answering this shaila, surely.
Are you asking why we've got this funny case about the street in the middle at all?
Yeah, it doesn't seem relevant. Because there are a million situations where one can see into someone else's rooftop or hotzer. So you should say, well, he must build this wall anyway.
You're saying that it's no different from any Hezekiah.
Yeah. So the answer is not necessarily. Well, let's just see Rashi, and we'll see Tosfos in a minute, and you'll see that's not necessarily the case. So Rashi says, first of all, Zeh shelo keneged zeh. Is halfway down. This one closes off his roof to the north. This one closes off to the south. Which means he draws the fence more than half the roof. So it should be a little bit opposite the where the other one has closed his roof off. Because of that, he won't be able to see. He won't be able to see at all into his friend's roof, right? Into his friend's roof. So there you are, right? So the Gemora says, I wanted to show you Tosfos, yeah. So look at Tosfos here. Tosfos says, the next Tosfos down is Dibra Maskal B'Shnei. B'Shnei Tzidi Rishus Harabim. It's the fourth Tosfos. Omeri, so the Re says, Davka B'Shnei Tzidi Rishus Harabim. This halacha only applies on two opposite sides of the street. Where he doesn't realize when the other one's going on the roof, so he can be careful not to do anything private when the other guy is there. From the fact that we say, I think it's as we say later, sorry, it should be as we say later on. But between two roofs, you can't force him. So this is actually something which we mentioned briefly, I think. Yeah, I think we mentioned this briefly on Daf Beis Omid. It was at the bottom of Daf Beis Omid Beis, on the top of Daf Gimel Omid Aleph. Rav Nachman talked about a case of a gag hasomach lechotze chaveiro, which I think we're going to talk about as well. Yeah, we're going to talk about that in the next Gemora as well, where you have a roof next to his friend's chotzer, and we wanted to prove that he says he has to build a marker which is 4 amos high. So we wanted to try and prove that first sugya Hezekiah Shmei Hezek, because he's got to build a marker. That's what we wanted to prove. And we said, no, there is different, because the person who owns the chotzer can say to the person who lives on the roof, I'm here all the time. I'm busy. The chotzer was literally, the courtyards in those days was really another room in the house. They did everything there. So I'm there all the time. This is the bottom of the base on the base. You're not there all the time. I don't know when you're going there. I don't know when you're going up on the roof that I can hide away from you. Yeah, so there's a mismatch of usage. So basically, Ali, to come to your point, is it's not always the case. It's not always the case that you have to that you can force them. Permanent situation, build a wall. If they're able to be careful of each other, then there isn't, and he's not able to force it. Yeah. It sounds like that the roofs were not used that much. They were occasional use, right? So there's a halacha of marker for a different reason, because of someone falling off, right? But in terms of the forcing someone else to, no, not necessarily. But when it's on two sides of the street, that's different, because he can't tell when he's on the roof, and therefore he can't know when to be careful of him. I don't know. Is that help? Yeah. So that's why we have this case. Okay.
So at the risk of asking the obvious, which you've just touched on anyway, if he's got a chiyuv of building a ma'akeh, what right does he have? What's different about what he's building now that he can be mechayev someone else?
So what's different? What?
If he has a chiyuv of building ma'akeh around his gag anyway,
yeah.
What are we talking about here that he would have an argument that says you've got to contribute?
No, it's to do with where he built it, isn't it?
Yeah, that's interesting.
Roof anyway.
That's interesting. You would have thought that the very fact that we're having a conversation based on usage means that he's using his roof. And if he's using his roof, he probably should be building a market anyway. But the difference could be that that there is a personal chiyuv to build a market, but I can't force you to do that. That's your personal obligation. That's like turning around to someone and saying, I have a responsibility to make sure you bench lulav. Yeah, okay, but we're discussing choshen mishpat now, right? So we're in a different world. So you're not wrong. Although, yeah, you're not wrong. Although,
why would only build half?
Absolutely, and I'm not.
The 4 amos is the point. A market can be.
Yeah, that's right. That's probably the simpler explanation. There are different rules in terms of height. Yeah. Is there a prescribed height for a marker? I don't know offhand whether there's a different meaning. Logically, whatever height is necessary to stop you falling off, right? That's what that would be. I presume that's also prescribed in halacha as to what the height needs to be. I'm sure it is.
Yeah, I think it's farmers.
Yeah. So then it would be then it would be the same. But it's yeah. Okay, but let's do a little bit more of the Gemara, because the Gemara now goes into this brisa in a bit more detail. Omar Mar, quotation from the brisa. This one makes a marker for half of his roof. This one makes a half of the marker for half of his roof. They're not opposite each other, umadif, and they overlap. Says the Gemara Pshita, obviously. Meaning, why would it not be like that? Obviously, it's going to be half-half. If there's an obligation, then obviously they're going to share it. So what's the whole point of telling me this in the Gemara? Yeah, the shared obligation should be obvious. Says the Gemara, the case is the kodim chad minayu va'avad. So one of them went and built his own, va'avad didei. Okay, so one of them went ahead before the other, knowing that there would be a future obligation, or an obligation now, for them to share and build half each. And he built his half. Okay, va'avad didei. So now it's interesting, because Ma'od Tema, what might you think? So, and then what happens, by the way? So he's built half, and then he turns around and knocks on the guy's door and says, I've done my bit, you do yours. Right? I've done my half, now you build yours. So the Gemara says, what might you think? The other one can now turn around to him and say, Shokol zinka va'avdei eskule. Take your payment, take whatever it costs, okay? And avdei eskule, and do the whole thing. Why? Because he can turn around to him and say, listen, you've already had to start putting, damaging a wall halfway anyway to build half the roof, half the fence. You might as well finish the job and I'll pay you. Then we've shared the costs and you do it. Kamash Malan says the Gemara comes to tell us, no, the other one can say to him, Dominic can say to him, you, my time of this, why do you not want to do this? Why is it that you don't want to start building anything? Because it's going to damage your wall. You're going to damage my wall as well. The more cement, and I don't think the buildings were as strong then as ours. The more cement and the more panels of wood you pile up on top of the roof, the weaker the structure is going to become. So you can't tell me that I have to bear that loss just because I started off building it. You see, Rashi explains this clearly, very clearly. Let's look at Rashi. Rashi is the word pshita, the high palg. It's obvious. This one is half and this one is half. So he says, one went ahead and he built his own, a marker for half his roof. Before he came to Beis Din. And after that, he claims his friend to make, he wants you do your half. So Maudin, what might think, since he's begun to do it, Yigmor marker begagoy, he might as well finish the marker on his whole roof. And the other one should pay him half of the expenditure. So Yozinko means yitzia, that's what it means, expenditure. And then this little Tosfos here again adds an explanation. Pshita, it says obvious. If he hadn't gone first, based on let's say he hadn't gone ahead and built half the market, right? So they came to Basin to discuss it. And then they add in the notes here, there's an older version. So neither of them want to build no roof. Let's say it's a basic, simple dispute. They come to Basin, and this guy doesn't want to do it, and that guy doesn't want to do it. They come to Basin for a ruling. Pshita the Basin Obviously, based on are going to make a compromise between them. Each one is going to have to make half of this marker. Or if they both agree, one of them can build, the whole thing, and the other one can pay him for the cost of the damage to his wall, right? Because that's another, if they're both amenable, that's what we call pshara, compromise, right? If they're happy, if he's happy to take a premium, he says, I'm happy to build a fence, but I don't want a premium for the damage my wall's going to suffer through having the weight of the fence. Great. If they're happy with that, great. But now says Rashi, the Kodim, that he's gone ahead and he's done it first. The other one should be able to, theoretically, we argue, you would think, can argue and claim, had you not done it first, he says to him, I would have done it all on my roof. You went ahead, I would have been happy. I would have taken that option. I would have taken the money and I would have built it entirely on my roof. But I don't want to do half-half. To start going looking for builders and laborers for half a fence. What's half a fence? It looks ugly anyway. He's going to say, I'm not interested in hiring laborers to build half a fence. Seems like a valid argument. So he says, no, why not? He says, why do you not want to do it? Because at the end of the day, you don't want your wall to be weakened. Kovet HaBinyan, says Rashi, from the weight of the building, which rests in it, it's heavy on the wall. What happens is that the cement on the top of the wall gets weaker as a result. That's what you're not interested in. He says, I'm also not interested in that. So I'd rather, that's why you can force him to build the other half, So they end up with half each, but just overlapping. In fact, that's why you can force them to do that. Right. Is that clear? Any questions?
Yeah.
Is that?
I'm still not really clear about all these claims and counterclaims. I mean, my first thought is you're building a wall or a roof. What you're not really putting the building. I mean, you'd have to have a pretty sloppily built building to really put pressure on the whole building. And you need the wall anyway for Gag, for Makkah anyway. And you're potentially enhancing the value of your building by having a Makkah, let alone not diminishing the value. It all feels like a slightly contrived argument to me.
Well, it's true in the sense that logically, you would say that yes, it's beneficial to have the marker. If I'm using the roof, I may need one halachically anyway, like I said. But the fact is, I don't think we're necessarily dealing with logic. When you're dealing with claim and counterclaim, if the other person puts in a valid argument against having to do something, then he's got that leg to stand on in court.
Right.
So we've still got to, we're looking at a case of dispute.
Right.
So the other one comes along and says, no, I don't want to. You have to remember, if there's no argument, we're not interested, right? If everyone's happy, we're not interested. It doesn't bother us. It's not interesting to us. Based on Shulchan Aruch, we don't care. We're interested where people don't get on, unfortunately. In Choshen Mishpat, that's what we're interested in, unfortunately, right? When there's a dispute. So this is clearly when the Gemora says it's set up. It's a very important point you're making, generally, because where the Gemora is set up in a very innocuous way. 2 houses and 2 out of the street. This one builds half a wall, that with half a wall. So you think, well, half a wall, what's going on? Like, why? Yeah. Obviously, it's an imposed order. We can impose the order on both parties that they have to build half the wall each. And then the Gemara explores, why should we do that? Why do we do that? Where does that come from that we impose that? Does that make sense? Even if we're object. Yeah. Does that make sense? Okay. Fine. Just before we finish, is everyone okay as a one-off next week? Are you okay just to start 8 o'clock, 15 minutes earlier? Is that okay just as a one-off?
Should be okay.
Yeah? Okay, just a one-off, then we'll resume, then we'll revert to normal the following week. So it'll be 8 till 9 next week, okay? Very good. Thank you all for joining.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay.
Cheers. Thank you.
Yeah. Night.